The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. My name is Jen Spiker and today I'll continue highlighting a video from Creation Ministries International. One of the most asked questions by both Christians and non-Christians alike is, if God is a God of love, why is there so much death and suffering in the world? Gary Bates is an author, speaker and researcher who says that our view about how we came to be will greatly inform our position on death. As this Creation Ministries interview continues, Gary explains why he believes the curse was an act of mercy.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
So can we just cover that point again? It sounded like you were saying it was a mercy of God to put the curse upon us. Can you explain that? So first of all, we're living, Adam and Eve, they were going to live eternally. Everything was good. You said it was very good. Mm-hmm. And that was God's original plan. But then because of Adam and Eve's rebellion, it was a mercy of God to put the curse on them that they would die. Am I saying that correct?
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes. See, we always think about Adam and Eve being cursed, but actually if you read Genesis 3, it tells us the ground was cursed, the plants were cursed. The whole of creation was cursed. We read about the heavens and earth. Well, that's been affected by Adam's sin. That's why God will eventually make a new heavens and earth. Mm. And so we talk about sin, we tend to think about personal sin. Well, we can understand why people fly planes into buildings or, steal your widescreen TV and break into your house and commit murders. But when we see things in nature too, right? It's a sign that the earth is also under bondage to decay. That's what it tells us in Romans. And that's why I made the point earlier that when we see things happening, things going wrong, it should be a reminder. When there are earthquakes in the world that kill thousands or tsunamis, or whether our own family members die, it's a reminder of what went wrong. In the last few years, Scott, I've lost my dad, my sister to cancer a few years ago. Mm. And then during COVID, I'm living in the United States and my brother is basically given months to live. Well, because of lockdowns and whatever, and I'm not here to discuss those, but I could not actually get back to Australia to see my brother. Oh. I had to say goodbye to him on the phone. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. I had to watch his funeral online. Gosh. And I can understand, people would say, well, I'm angry at God, but I was angry at sin. Wow. I can honestly say to you, I thought, this is the problem with the world we live in, and part of the problem is it's my fault. I'm a descendant of Adam. You don't have to teach people how to do wrong things. From the moment we're born, you don't have to teach children to misbehave and to rebel. Mm. That's part of our nature. Mm. And so the only remedy for us is to accept Christ. Because, people say, well, what did God do about all the suffering in the world? Mm. He did something. He sent Jesus. And here's the next picture, okay, the big picture, because we're so focused on this life. This is not the main game. This is not the grand final. It's the world to come. We're not saved just for this life. We've been saved for the world to come.
Wow. And having that perspective, I imagine, is going to be, I can almost guarantee is going to be a lot more helpful when you go through personal tragedy, like some of the things you were just describing. If you know that this life is not all there is, and there's an age to come that will last forever and ever, then this life is just a small blip. Not saying those things were not painful, but I imagine in light of eternity, you were able to get through some of those things.
Yes, because I realized the problems that afflict me, as I mentioned, as a result of sin. Look, does this take God by surprise? Again, if we read Scripture, Jesus says, you will have trouble. Now, anybody watching this, if you're looking online, anybody here never had trouble in their life. Mm. You will have trouble because he recognized we live in a cursed and fallen world. When he visited the tomb of his friend Lazarus, it says, Jesus wept. Why did he weep? He had the power to restore him, which he did. But I believe that the Creator was grieved at what sin had done to his creation, that it can cause the pain of loss, can cause the pain of suffering. And so when people go through those things, I've had so many Christians come up to me and say, why did God allow this to happen? Well, I'd say it's a reflection of the world that we're in. And that's the very, very reason that we need Christ. And some people will say, well, hang on, but I'm not a sinner. I don't rob banks. I don't do those types of things. But it's not the gravity of the offence that's the problem. It's who we're offending. It's who we are sinning against. And whether it's, humanly speaking, the smallest sin or the worst one, it doesn't matter. In terms of our offence before the Creator who made us, the gravity of the offence is the same.
Yeah, a lot of people I speak to, Gary, when evangelizing, will say something to the effect of, look, I'm not too bad. I'm going to do okay. And I think when I ask them questions further, I find out that they're actually comparing themselves with Hitler or comparing themselves with a mass murderer or a rapist. And they're saying, comparatively, I seem to be doing okay. But as you're saying, the problem is sin is still sin.
If I could say that, I remember I was back in Australia when 9/11 occurred. And for the whole week after, there was literally 24/7 coverage on the TV. And I remember, I won't mention him by name, but one of Australia's most famous TV hosts at the time was well known for his antipathy to Christianity. And he was interviewing a Salvation Army grief counsellor. And, Salvos did a great job when there's train crashes and they go there to try to provide counsel for, loved ones that are suffering. And he turned around to the Salvation Army officer and he said, well, do you believe that God is creator? And he said, well, yes. And he said, well, if he's creator, he said, and he's supposedly in control, he said, why didn't he do something to stop these terrorists flying planes into buildings? And the Salvation Army officer turned around and said, well, let me ask you, he said, is God in control of your life?
Wow.
Wow, what an answer. You see, ultimately it gets back to the root of the problem. And so whether we look at creation, falling, and as I said, the tsunamis, the earthquakes, the bushfires, and there might be some human causes to some of those things, or our personal sin, our inhumanity to one another, they both have the same root cause. Sin. The ground was cursed, the plants was cursed, and humans were cursed also as a result. And so that's why the whole of creation also has to be restored.
And now I want to ask you a question about creation, and it's why did God curse his creation? But before that, I just want to pick up something you said about Jesus and Jesus weeping at the death of Lazarus. And so I was just thinking at that moment, well, if you're trying to mix your worldviews and you're trying to have this evolutionary worldview, why would God be sad? Why was Jesus sad about death and suffering if he was the one that instituted it at the beginning? And it's almost like, and Jesus went about healing sicknesses and diseases. Gary, how do people have an evolutionary worldview and try to be a Christian at the same time and then say healing is what Jesus did? Like, why would Jesus heal? Is that a fair question to ask?
Well, when Jesus healed, what was he doing? He was actually reversing the effects of the curse. Yeah. So early missionaries, when we went out to third world countries, it wasn't just to take the gospel, but we took other things. We taught health benefits, sanitation, all of those things that improve the stock of mankind. And of course, you find a lot of those even health laws in Scripture as well. So yes, there is a bit of an inconsistency because the big problem, as I mentioned before, is people think death is normal. You say, well, yeah, you're going to die someday. But according to God, death is not normal. And he even describes it as an enemy, doesn't he? The last enemy to be destroyed is death.
Yeah, I think that nails it there. If God says it's an enemy, then it's not what he used to create. He didn't use this evolutionary process of death, surely not, because he says it's an enemy and he's going to put it under his feet. So that question I wanted to ask you, some people will ask, well, look, it was Adam and Eve that sinned. They deserve the curse. What about creation? What about all the animals? Well, the whole of creation was cursed in Genesis 3. Why did God do that?
Well, human beings are kind of, almost to quote an evolutionary term, we're kind of the top of the food chain. So Adam and Eve were given responsibility of creation. When God says go and subdue or fill the earth, Adam and Eve, Adam in particular, was the federal head of creation. So he actually knew, in a sense, that what he would do, his consequences, he was responsible for the world around him. So once he sinned, it actually had universal consequences. And, remember, God said immediately, "What have you done?" And if we read Scripture, Adam was very, very well aware of his offence from the moment he did it. He realised he had offended the one who made him.
Okay, so he was in charge, he was responsible, everything got cursed with him. So Gary, instead of seeing all the cancer and death and earthquakes and tsunamis in the world and shaking our fist at God and saying, why have you created like the world like this? It should remind us, actually, something's wrong. Something went wrong. And we can't do anything to save ourselves from this sin-cursed world. No. Can you give us some examples from Scripture that talk about this? Yeah,
there are several, but one of my favourite and a much discussed book is the book of Job. And of course, we know the story. Satan, which means the accuser, he stands before God and he says to God, "Look at Job whom you made." God says first, he says, look at Job. God calls him righteous. God even calls Job a righteous man. Effectively, Satan's accusation is that the only reason Job loves you is because of all the good things he's got, his wealth and his privilege in his life. And so imagine poor Job. He's got no idea of this conversation happening in the heavenlies. And basically God says, "Okay, well, do your worst." And we read that Job gets sick. His friends come along. I mean, isn't this relevant today? Why are all these bad things happening to you? Have you caused offense to God? What sin have you got going on in your life? His wife says, "Curse God and die." Family members die, etc. And, Job is human. He complains. He whines. But I think it's fascinating. If you read the book towards the end of the book of Job, God starts talking to him in creation passages. "Job, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth?" In other words, my perspective there is God saying, do you think I see what's happening? Can't you understand? I can see what's happening in your life. And if I could read a passage just so I can be accurate from the book of Job. Job knew he was a sinner, and through those creation passages, he knew that God was capable of raising his dusty bones back from the ground. And in Job 19, verses 25 to 27, for me, this is one of the most powerful passages in the whole Bible, and I always get goosebumps when I read it. So Job stands there and he says, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has thus been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me."
This is The Spotlight, and we've been hearing Gary Bates with more from a long-form interview produced by Creation Ministries International, exploring the age-old question, if God is a God of love, why is there so much death and suffering in the world? It's good to be reminded that death is not normal and to hear the hope that Job had as he faced incredible suffering. I'm Jen Spiker, and next time on The Spotlight, we'll hear more of this conversation with Gary Bates, including why he believes many Christians don't have an eternal perspective like Job. If you can't wait and want to watch the interview in full, you can do that right now in the Free Vision app. Just tap the Watch tab and scroll to the Creation Ministries International channel for this and other fascinating interviews.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the Free Vision app.